All right, let's get right into it. We're going to break down a huge economic claim made by President Trump. It's a number that's caused a ton of debate, and we're going to figure out exactly where it came from and what it actually means.
And here it is, the number we're talking about today, $17 trillion. That's a 17 with 12 zeros after it. I mean, it's a number so big, it's almost impossible to wrap your head around, right? And this was presented as the amount of new investment the U.S. would see in just 1 year.
So, here's how we're going to tackle this. First, we'll look at the exact declaration. Then, we'll try to put that massive number into some kind of perspective. After that, we'll hear the economic rebuttal, what the experts are saying. We'll follow the money, and finally, we'll ask the big question. Was this about politics or a real economic plan?
Okay, first things first. Let's go right back to the source. Where and when was this claim actually made?
It all happened back on September 18th during a press conference, and the claim itself was super direct, very confident. The United States will generate more than $17 trillion in investment this year. I mean, you can just imagine, a statement that bold is definitely going to make some waves.
Now, before we go any further, we have to get a grip on just how big this number is. I mean, what does $17 trillion even look like? Let's put it into context.
Okay, check this out. Let's compare it to the entire U.S. economy. In 2024, the U.S. GDP, that's everything the country produces in a year, was around $29 trillion. So $17 trillion in investment, that's almost 60% of the whole U.S. economy for 1 year. A jump that big? Well, it's just never happened before. It would be totally unprecedented.
But let's zoom out even more. Let's think globally. The entire world's economy, all of it, is about $110 trillion. So this $17 trillion, we're talking about more than 15% of the entire planet's economic output. To get that much money flowing into just one country in 1 year, wow, that would be a seismic shift in how global money moves.
So you drop a number that big, and you can bet the economists are going to have something to say about it. So what was the reaction? Did the experts think this was actually possible?
Yeah, exactly. After you see how it stacks up against the US and even the world economy, you start to ask the obvious question. It's not even about being optimistic or pessimistic. It's just, is a number like that even in the realm of possibility?
Well, one economist, Peter Schiff, had a really pointed take on it. He didn't just say it was too high. He called it, and I'm quoting here, economically incoherent. Basically, he's saying it doesn't just bend the rules of economics, it completely breaks them.
And here's his reasoning, broken down. First, he says, for the U.S. to even handle that much investment, the economy would have to grow by like 50% in a single year. That's unheard of. Second, all that money flooding in would make the U.S. dollar's value go through the roof, which has its own set of problems. And his final point was simple. When you actually add up all the real, announced investment deals, the numbers just aren't there. Not even close.
You know, that last point is the perfect segue. Let's do exactly that. Let's follow the money and do a little fact-checking on these figures. So as analysts started digging into where this $17 trillion was supposed to come from, they started noticing something, a pattern. When you looked closely at the individual deals, the numbers, well, they just didn't quite line up.
Okay, here's a great example. You might have heard about a $1 trillion deal with Japan. Sounds huge, right? But when fact-checkers looked into it, it wasn't $1 trillion in new investment. It was a pledge to increase Japan's total investment to $1 trillion. The actual increase was only about $216 billion, and that was spread out over several years, not all at once.
Actually, when you add up all the commitments listed in the White House's own data, all the corporate and foreign investments, the number you get is about $5.1 trillion. Now, don't get me wrong, $5 trillion is still an enormous amount of money, but it leaves a gap of almost $12 trillion from that original $17 trillion claim.
And that massive gap is what leads us to the final and maybe most important part of this whole thing. If the math doesn't check out from an economic standpoint, then what's the point of the number? Is this a political statement or is it a legitimate economic forecast?
So it really boils down to two different ways of looking at it. On one side, you have the political messaging argument. The idea is that you use a huge, impressive number to project economic strength, get investors excited, and build a positive story. But on the other side, you have the economic reality argument. This view says that when you use a number that's so far off, you risk damaging your credibility and setting expectations that are impossible to meet.
And this quote from an analyst really hits the nail on the head for the economic side of the argument. It says, investment is a long-term process. You can't just conjure trillions with a press conference. It's a reminder that real investment is built brick by brick, deal by deal over a long time. You can't just speak it into existence.
And that brings us to the big takeaway here, a question that's bigger than just this one number. We expect leaders to have a bold vision, to use big numbers to inspire people. But where do you draw the line? When does a bold vision cross over into being a misleading figure? Thinking about where that line is, that's really what this whole $17 trillion debate is all about. It's definitely something to keep in mind the next time you hear a number that seems almost too good to be true.